But as we think through the day, the things that I've been involved in, explicit instruction, those strategies, putting real intention into your lesson. How well you teach is how well your students will learn. Remember that from Anita Archer? And so, getting your pedagogy, that's a big word for strategy, teaching, right? Being able to understand what the content is, what needs to be articulated to your students, what the purpose of it goes back to good teaching equals good learning. We want learning, that needs to be the outcome. We can get lost in a ton of technology. Okay, I love technology when it works. I love it, right? It's helped me. There's things I can do with technology that's amazing, but we can't depend on it entirely. And it still goes back to that human interaction. It's like the difference between, and I'm going to use an analogy here. It's like being in person or doing remote. There's something with remote that you just can't quite capture in that interaction. That human, we're wired to be together in most cases, in most instances, and to learn from one another. And so, as we think through today, and this is Special Ed 101. This is an overview of kind of like the history of the disability movement. What laws set it all up, and what it is, to kind of connect the dots behind why we do what we do. Okay, what is special education? What's the intention of special education? Where did it come from? There was a time in this country where students with disabilities were not even in school. They were not allowed in school. They had special schools or houses or places where the students were excluded from the general population of students. And so as we came through, as the country evolved from the 60s, the 1960s, when I was actually born, I was born in 1966, and coming through that, we saw a great emphasis placed on civil rights, okay? A lot of it had to do with race relations in this country. We still deal with that today. But as that emerged, we started to notice that students with disabilities or people with disabilities started to come to the forefront of some places of thought and legislation. And so we started to see a little more push in and inclusion of all, right? And so that's kind of where it came from. And so it's not kind of where it came from, it is where it came from. We couldn't say, okay, we've got to level the playing field for one group that had been mistreated. We had to do it for all groups, right? And so we start looking at that inclusive attitude, and special ed really emerged from that. And it wasn't until about 1973 that we even had 504 law, okay? And 504 law, if you can think about having a disability and having accommodations. If you have a federal building, that federal building has to be up to code. They have to have elevators to give access, okay? And that's what 504 is. It's an access law that includes every disability category, every disability, and every walk of life. It's for all people. And it's in the workplace. There's rules in the workplace that are governed by that. And it's also in your schools, because the schools are provided with funding, okay? So everybody that has an IEP also qualifies for protection under 504 law. Everybody that has 504, though, doesn't have an IEP, okay? Now, what do I mean by that? You can have a disability, but not have a significant enough of an adverse effect on your performance to need specially designed instruction. So there's 3 prongs of eligibility, and you're going to have to deal with eligibility a lot. You're going to have to learn to read psychologicals, you're going to have to look at criteria for disability, and you're going to have to say, does this student have a significant enough impact or adverse effect on their overall performance when compared to students that are in the regular classroom without disabilities, that they would need intentional, planned, designed, outside the box kind of specially designed instruction. Okay? So to be eligible in Kentucky for an IEP, you have to meet the success criteria of one of the 14 categories that we're going to talk about. I'm sorry, I said success criteria. I meant criteria. You have to meet the criteria of the disability. You have to qualify. You have to have an adverse effect. And you have to need special design instruction because of that adverse effect. So some 504 kids, for example, you might have a student that has ADHD. But with medicine, some of the problems are mitigated, and the effects of that are not so severe that we need to plan instruction for that student. Okay? They're not so behind, the residual effects of that does not allow them that access to the curriculum. Now, they may need extended time, an accommodation, in order, sometimes they get off task, whatever, and they need more time. So we give them that accommodation, but we're not really teaching them anything about how to stay on task, okay? We're just giving them some more time to manage that. So 504 law started in 73, and then about 1975, we saw Public Law 94-142, which was the precursor to IDEA. It's not a civil rights law, but it is an entitlement program that has to be reauthorized every so often. So you'll see from time to time there'll be some changes, some subtle changes that come along with the different education acts. It's an act. The idea is the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. Okay? And so it's a little bit different than 504 law. 504 law is permanent. It hinges on having a disability and accommodation and equity. You know the difference between equity and equality. Equality is giving everybody the same thing at the same time. Equity is giving everybody what they need when they need it. Okay? So it's an equity law. If you need an accommodation to overcome that barrier, we provide it. And so that's really 504 history. That's really the disability movement, kind of in a nutshell a little bit, if you will. So we want to transition here for a second. We want to get you thinking. We want to get you moving. I'm going to give you some paper, okay? Give you another piece of Jamboard here, person Jamboard. I'll give you that, okay? And this is set up perfect because I have 4 groups. All right. Now, what we're gonna work on right now, and some of you may have had this, and if you have, you're gonna be really good at it. But this is the FAPE activity, okay? FAPE kind of drives everything we do in special education. All right. So let's see how we can do this. All right. Kyle, did you care to kind of partner with my friend from Hazard over here before he got lost? He had to go to the doctor. He had to go to the doctor. That's what I heard. That's what I heard. I was just being funny. All right. Okay. So, now we have an acronym in special education. I told you earlier today, we worked on IEP. Now we're going to work on FAPE. Sometimes we refer to that as FAPE. Okay? But what I want you to do right now at your table is I want you to work together in a group, and I want you to break down FAPE. I want you to take the F and tell me what is represented. I want you to take the A, tell me what's represented. I want you to take the P and tell me what's represented. You can use your markers. You don't have to use the sticky notes. You can use your markers. And when you get finished, you're going to have F, A-P-E. You're gonna have the word, and you're gonna have some bullet points that you're gonna be able to talk about each of those points, and then we'll discover it together, okay? Okay. There's so much that can be learned from this one acronym.
No, this is the. Yeah, we're good.
All right. Y'all need something else? Something I can help you with? That one just keeps sticking to the table there.
Oh, did you?
Need another marker? We got some more markers?
We're good, we're like a rainbow effect.
Okay.
Those out next week on the paper.
Yeah, I want you to discuss these words that you come up with, and I want you to think about what these mean in the context of special education. Okay? Oh, she's gone already on. All right.
So how they relate to special education, so public.
Now, as we're thinking about these things,
Like, so how what does this mean, like?
special education is an entitlement. Okay? It's something that school districts get tons of funding to provide. Okay? So I want you to think through that. It's an entitlement. All students with disabilities get this. Okay?
So he said like, school get there.
When you think about the contrast in some of these words. What would be the opposite of some of these words?
To provide service.
Modifications made or their ability was
We'll do one for each of them, appropriate and
based upon.
the same for everybody. Or just for, or what's appropriate. Individual, right, so, appropriate.
Probably it will just be referred to with everyone else, so. Just kind of at the greatest extent with their, public use within the general education. The greatest extent possible. User owned.
Everyone, no matter, crap, everyone else acknowledges the country.
Now, in most cases, modeling good teaching, I would say to you, don't use your notes, work in a silo, but I'll let you work in a group right now. So, here, I'm gonna extend this just a little bit. I'm gonna let you use your device. See what you can find on your old handy dandy computer there that everybody carries around in their pocket, okay? This old thing right here. See what it says in there, and see if that helps frame your, and then discuss it a little bit, okay? I'm gonna put the work completely on you guys. I'm tired. But now, it's not good if you just read it for yourself. Discuss it with one another, okay? You got a book over here. She's pulling out the textbook on.
The law.
Yes. What book is that?
It's, the law and special education. Ooh.
It's yeah. He's all over that Irish stuff.
Yeah, like I just got done
He's
reading,
he's the man.
I just got done reading the, section 504, I got just.
This class you're taking.
Yeah, it is. So I
Where you
got
taking?
I would take
Oh,
3 of
first,
these to make
So I
it.
just got one, I guess. Yeah. Yeah,
Are you in the MIT program?
almost. I should have it all this time. So let's say it's.
Okay, so I'm gonna give you about, I'm gonna put you on time here, I'm gonna give you about 3 more minutes, okay? We'll give you about 3 minutes here to close this up, because we need a couple, we gotta cover a couple other things.
They stand to the side, without charge.
Access to remote services.
He talks. Most days.
To ensure that each student competency oversees completed
Everybody lasts like,
See, I forget the names of the classes, I just remember the teachers.
learning, place,
This one was to me was that.
oh, mine was pretty good.
There was just so much more in that little class.
It was like, you had algebra and five things for teaching.
Yeah, and then 4 people are just following 3, 2, 1 things.
You get it, for example, about 3 to 4 pages.
Michelle guy was.
All right, we got about 45 seconds, you close that down. And, what I want you to do is I want you to find a spot in here. I want you to find a spot where you can stand up and display what you've learned.
Look for it.
Okay?
Copy paste it over.
See, I had COVID. Please, I'm so sick.
I skipped y'all out, I can find a spot.
No, just, now that, wait, I can't remember that teacher.
Good deal. All right, let's start now. Let's start. Let's start back here with Adrian, my friend from Owsley County, and his handy dandy partner, Candace. I'm learning that name.
This last night class.
I told him I was gonna learn the names. Lord, it's hard for me, I'm getting old. Talk to us about free. Talk to us about free. You guys been through this a little bit. Should have some good answers. Let's listen, let's give them all your attention.
Free education, benefit the student, family doesn't pay anything, although they do pay taxes.
They do pay taxes.
Yes, they do pay taxes.
Yeah, so through that, it gets turned back and but in school, the special education program, the IEP, the services, anything that has to do with that IEP and delivering that free appropriate public education is free. And this also should tell us too, that when you go to an ARC meeting, the last thing you want to talk about is how much something costs. And so you have a district rep in your meeting, or you should. Every time you have an ARC meeting, you should have a chairperson, and they are trained by us and by other people, and they should know that cost is never something that you can talk about. Because if it's a need for that student, the entitlement is there, and we're supposed to get it for them. Very good. What about, let's jump ahead to over here, and let's go with the P word. Let's skip A for a second. Let's talk about public. Who's gonna speak? Hey. Let's get up. Yeah, I want you to move because I want you to experience that, feel that, and it really hits all four of those modalities of learning, okay?
So P is public, and we've just said that it's just within the general education setting.
Okay, P is public, it's within the general education setting. Does anyone in any of the other groups want to say anything else about public? Anyone want to add to that public discussion?
The least restrictive environment for the students.
Okay,
So, you want to make sure that the student is getting the services that they need.
okay,
In the place that's best suited for that student.
okay, perfect. So, let me throw, you guys have anything to add? You got kind of smiling back there, I was just wondering, you kind of look like you.
We're just trying.
He's like,
We're just trying to keep this held
Just
up.
trying to keep the paper out there. Okay,
Just for everyone, I mean,
it's
that's what,
it's for everyone.
like preschool all the way through, anything that
Yeah, there's
receives.
some ages associated with it, isn't there? 3 to 21?
Anything that receives federal funding.
Yes, yeah, if you receive federal funding. Now, let's think devil's advocate here. Dion this morning talked about examples and non-examples. So what would be a non-example of a public school, but was still a school? Private schools, exactly. Private schools don't receive the entitlement. Therefore, this FAPE idea is not extended to students that do not attend public schools, right? Now, we do have just a little bit of a, it's money that's set aside. We sometimes refer to it as flow-through dollars, that where you get just a portion of that set aside for your private school students, okay? And the school system has that money, they have control of that money, and they decide how they're going to provide service. So they might just say, oh, well, we just got $4,000 or $5,000 here, set aside funds for private school students. So what they do have to do is they have to consult with the parents of the private school students and just say, hey, we've decided as a group that we're going to give speech to private school students, and that's all we have money to do. When you go to a private institution, you forfeit your right or your entitlement, okay? So you don't get the IEP, okay? What about education? What do you guys have to say about education back here?
We put services designed to meet the individual needs of students with disabilities.
Okay, so there's some design, there's some intentionality, there's some goals, there's some objectives, there's services, there's special kind of teaching. We've talked about all that today, we really have. We've hit on it, and it's been a fast and furious day, but we've kind of hit on all those topics. So what do you guys say about appropriate? Just to kind of lead us to our last piece that we're going to talk about.
So we just say individual needs based on student ability. So whatever their abilities, just based on individuals.
Okay, that's really good. That's really good. Individual. Do you guys have anything to add to appropriate?
Individualized education plan for students with learning needs.
Okay.
So the IEP, appropriate, it's appropriate for that kid, what disability, what learning style they have,
Okay.
it's appropriate.
It's appropriate, okay. Could you guys, what did you all come up with over here? Modifications made based upon ability level. Okay. I want to caution you a little bit about the interchangeable use of accommodation and modification, okay? Modification means that what's learned, the expectation has been changed. Accommodation gives you builds a bridge or provides a way for the student to show what they've learned in spite of the disability, where we accommodate it. It's like, okay, student can't read the grade level material, but we read it to them and then they can answer questions, okay? That's an accommodation. But if you're talking about a modification, we're gonna reduce the ability level. You see what I'm saying? So I think before I would put modification there, I would think more about individualized plans. But I want to go a little deeper with you on this right here, because I really want you to have this, why we do what we do. There was a little court case that turned into a big court case. The kid was autistic. You've heard the story if you've been in my trainings before. His name was Andrew. Andrew F. was autistic. He was on the spectrum, and he had some real difficult behaviors, okay? He was afraid of flies, house flies, you know, the common fly. He was afraid that that water was going to turn over and spill. He was, had a terrible fear of using the bathroom in public, okay? Using a public restroom, I should say. I said that wrong, but yeah, I have a fear of that myself sometimes. But Andrew was one of those kids that he entered school at 3, okay? We have preschools in Kentucky. He entered school at 3, he immediately had an IEP. They started initially doing a few things with Andrew. He had a program, he had an IEP, he had an individualized education program. And they used some discrete trials, some ABA therapy that lots of times schools will use on a limited basis. We can't do it all day long for 35 hours a week, but we can do it on a limited basis, and sometimes we'll use a timer. And he got himself, it almost became, I guess the school thought, counterproductive for him to use that timer, because he was enamored with that timer. He loved the timer. And when they took the timer away, he spent the rest of his day trying to elope to somewhere in the school where he thought the timer might be, okay? So they had a terrible time keeping him in the 4 walls, okay? He was a run risk factor, okay? He was a student that had lots of fears, lots of behaviors, okay? Now, we have to address behavior in school, right? It's part of the IEP. And so what they didn't do in the Andrew case was they just pretty much didn't do any assessment in behavior, didn't do an intervention plan, and they kept his goals the same from year to year to year to year, okay? So he was 3 years old, and then he was 4 years old, he had the same goals, okay? Didn't do any assessment, they didn't do any progress monitoring. They didn't do anything with the parents to ask them what they thought was needed to be worked on. And so, long story short, when he got 11, he had grown some, okay? And so when he reached over to grab you by the ear, it hurt a lot more than it did when he was 3, okay? He could pull your hair a lot harder, he could run a lot faster, and so they were having some real trouble dealing with him. So the parents decide during the summer that they're gonna take him down to the behavior facility, which was a private facility, on their own dime. Remember, no cost, right? They're gonna take him down there on their own dime, and they're gonna enter him into this facility that was ironically named Firefly. Remember I said he had fear of flies. They entered him in a school called Firefly. Guess what they did? They did a functional behavioral assessment. They developed a behavior intervention plan. Guess what happened to his behavior in about 2 weeks? It got better. It got better because they did some assessment and they changed their approach. That's what you do all day. You assess and you adapt your approach all day long. You're metacognitively thinking about not only what you're learning, but what your students are learning. So they changed their approach there. They changed the approach for the student, and he got better. Now, fast forward, parents go back to the school, neighborhood school. They're not the suing kind of parents, kind of like, that's not our first thought usually. as good old Appalachian Eastern Kentuckians, we don't think about that, right? We love our neighbors, right? And so they said, we've got another child in our family that's going to go to this neighborhood school. We just want you to take the IEP and implement it as it's written in Firefly. And guess what they said? We don't have to, because the Rowley case, the precedent that had been set in the previous Supreme Court decision, said that we only have to provide a floor of opportunity for achievement and success. We only have to do the minimum for this student. We've written an IEP, we've got goals in place, and we don't feel like we have to change. And that was the standard in the West at that time. Now out here in our circuit, we'd already kind of started thinking about, hey, we better start doing some of these things because we're getting, some people are suing and school systems are getting in trouble. But the Rowley case was kind of, it kind of produced an adage that we referred to in special education for a long time, and it was, you don't have to provide a Cadillac in that IEP, you only have to provide in the substance of the IEP a serviceable Chevrolet. Okay, not a Cadillac, serviceable Chevrolet. Well, Andrew appealed after that. They got an attorney, and they said, this is not right. Our child deserves a chance to have success. We've seen this success down here just by some planning, some assessment, and some change in methodology and delivery. And why can't we have that here? Because we pay taxes, like you all said a while ago, and he's entitled to this, right? So we go forward. They appeal. First court says no. The standard is the Rowley standard. Only a minimum floor of opportunity. We're only going to provide this basic floor of opportunity for advancement. And the attorney said this is not right, and so they appealed up, and it went on up to the appellate court. Same thing. They continued to appeal. Okay. Finally, the Supreme Court decided to hear this case. 2017. It started in like 2014. Okay, so it took 3 years for them to get through this. Now you think about the 3 years that elapsed while they were, because there's this thing called stay put, and that kid had to stay put, okay, because they had a disagreement. And so that means he stays in his placement, or he stays at the private school on the parents' dime, right? And so they weren't the most wealthy people in the world. They were just like you and I. And so they stayed with it. And Justice Roberts heard the case, and they said basically 4 things. And this is what I wanted to get to. What makes the substance of the IEP different now across the United States? 1, you've got to meet the student where they are, and they were not meeting him where he was. Okay? 2, you got to have ambitious goals. You determine the current level of functioning, and you write goals with that Bloom's taxonomy that we talked about a little bit in the last session, where we're ramping up the rigor. We're always pushing the student just ahead of his comfort zone. Okay? So unique circumstances, ambition. Then the third thing it said was, and this is what, and I've listened to this guy talk on podcast, the guy that represented him, I can't remember his name right now, but he was the attorney that got all the way to the Supreme Court. He said the key piece was no progress monitor. They didn't have any data. They couldn't say that they provided anything because they didn't have any progress monitor. The progress monitor is your evidence. It's the cover your backside kind of evidence that you need when you give an IEP to a student, when you implement an IEP. If you don't have data to say, look, here, this is how the student responded to the instruction, and this is what we found. You don't have any progress monitoring on those goals. You don't have a leg to stand on. So that was the main thing that got them over the top all the way to the Supreme Court. So there was no progress monitoring. The goals had been the same for year after year after year. Copy, paste, copy, paste. The present levels were the same year after year. So what's our takeaway? We don't copy and paste. We don't write goals that don't have good outcomes. That we write goals that are based on the student where they are in a lot of their unique circumstances. We meet their disability needs, and we respond to those needs through an individualized plan. And that substance, that how much progress that student makes, is left up to local districts. But here's the key. We're not just doing the minimum for that kid. We're recognizing ambitious goals. We're recognizing meeting where they are. We're looking at the standards for our targets, and we're trying to move them closer, trying to close those gaps. And that last piece, that last takeaway, that fourth takeaway was no parent involvement in the decision. That's why I think you see in our regulations, our new record review document highlights the need for parent involvement and to make sure that we're capturing that open-ended question. What do you think your student needs to be working on or your child needs to be working on today? So those are the four big pieces with faith. It's why we do what we do. It's what they get if they have been determined eligible in the state of Kentucky. And remember, I said those three things that get you eligible: meet the criteria for the disability, have an adverse effect that's significant enough to need specially designed instruction. Okay, so that's a big piece of what we wanted to talk about today. And then the other part that I wanted to talk to you about, I've got several other things in here, like how No Child Left Behind impacted the laws, and what the goals for No Child Left Behind were, is that all would be proficient in reading and math by 2013-14. I remember when this came out, and Dion knows more about proficiency rates than I do, but I know that one of the things that we can say about mathematics in the state of Kentucky, that we're about 8% proficiency in mathematics, right? It's just not getting it done, is it? It's just not getting it done. But when you think about No Child Left Behind, in 2001 was saying we're going to get everybody to proficiency by 2013. And that means all. When it says all, that means all. And so we're far behind, and literacy rates are much the same. They're not as bad as the math rates, but they're certainly not proficient, right?
You'll see that's the graph down in the bottom right-hand corner.
Yeah, right here on this slide right here, you've got your proficiency in mathematics in the Quebec region, and in the 4th grade and the 8th grade. And one of them now, I remember, like this was like 26% proficiency.
That's reading, 4th grade reading proficiency. So that's our students with disabilities. They look at proficiency rates so they do a check at 4th grade, 8th grade, and then high school. And so in 4th grade, that top one, and it's hard to see, but you'll be able to see this when you bring up your copy of it. But we were at, I don't know, it was 50% or 40%, and that dropped down to about 26%. But you'll see our proficiency rates. Kids do proficiency for students with disabilities is a little better in 4th grade. By 8th grade, it drops some. By high school, it drops again.
Content gets harder, doesn't it? So we got to continue to look for those.
Our gaps get bigger.
And our gaps get bigger. But look at some of this stuff. It's kind of eye-opening. It's almost an indictment of public education here when you look at the goals that were set. And I think in 2001, who was the president in 2001? Bush. George, right? Was it W? It was W, right?
Same here, sitting early.
Yes.
Yeah.
Exactly. And so, look at what highly qualified teachers will teach all. Right now, we're struggling to have teachers, right? A lot of you are in MAC programs. A lot of you, and it's no knock on you guys. We're trying to do our very best to provide you with the resources and the support. But we're a far cry from some of these things that were in No Child Left Behind. And then when Obama got into office, they went with ESSA, right?
Every student succeeds.
Every Student Succeeds Act. And it changed some things. But it was basically the same kind of thing. It was just different metrics, okay? And I'll hit that in just a second. But look at safe, drug-free classrooms, which will be advantageous to learning. 100% of all EL students, English language learners, will be proficient in English. I guarantee we've not met, I don't know what the numbers are, but I don't think we're at 100%, right? And then 100% of all students will graduate. And we know that we have to be concerned with graduation rate in Kentucky as systems that provide, we have annual determinations for how our districts are doing in regards to indicators, okay? And we have indicators 1 through what is it, 17?
There's, we can't,
Yeah.
1 through 14 that we use.
Yeah. And so, like indicator 11 we know is 60-day timelines, how well you do on initial referrals and getting those referrals back and getting eligibility decisions and IEPs in place if they're eligible within the 60 school days, that's 11. And then 12 is getting those 3-year-olds transition, and 13 is transition, post-secondary transition markers. But 1 and 2 have to do with dropout rates and graduation rates. And so we have, you see a concern with that all the way back. But this impacted the evolving program that is special education, okay? It impacted because we looked at proficiency here. We know our students with disabilities are not proficient in the state. And we also know that it impacted special education because teachers in special education, if they just had a special education degree, did not meet the mark here. And so there was a big mess over that. Like you couldn't teach science. You couldn't, if you didn't have a science degree. And so it was very impactful, and it has a lot to do with where we are right now. Again, adequate yearly progress was a big piece for schools, and they put some sanctions on folks. Then there was the Every Student Succeeds Act in 2015. This was Obama. It replaces No Child Left Behind. It maintains much of the No Child Left Behind, including testing of all students in grades 3 through 8. A lot of that assessment stuff was mandated by these laws, and that's fine, as long as we don't forget to fall in love with the process as we move through, right? If we start with the end in mind, it's good sometimes, but we also have to understand that day to day is where the learning occurs, and we got to focus on good teaching and good learning. And once in high school, the student data on literacy and math will be disaggregated amongst groups, including disability groups. Alternate assessment, only allowing 1% will be assessed, so we know about that. That still remains true. And then you see for the first time references to universal design for learning. Now that is a system, that's a proactive system of teaching and learning where you design your curriculum in a way that's going to account for all the differences that you might encounter in the classroom. Universal design for learning. I'll give you an example. How many of you have ever seen a curb cut or knows what a curb cut is? All right, you go downtown and there's a curb, you have to learn to parallel park beside it, right? But right down here at the end, there's a place that's kind of cut out. It's curb cut, right? And why is it there? It's there so a wheelchair can get access, right? It's a 504 law. Okay, bring this all together. Now, what universal design for learning is really neat. Why it's really neat in this context is that once they got that down there, not only did it let wheelchairs come through, but it let kids in baby buggies and strollers get up there and have access too, right? So that universal design helped all the people. And the best analogy I ever heard about universal design for learning has to do with bowling. If you've ever bowled, you got a 7-10 split, okay? That 7-10 split occurs when you bowl the ball the same way every time, okay? You roll it right down the middle, okay? And every now and then you'll miss that 7 pin and you'll miss that 10 pin. And it's really hard to pick up, right? Unless you're really good at hitting it. You have to slice it across there. But think about your classrooms for a second. If you put a hook in there and you don't do it the same way every time, and you account for differences in modality, differences in interest, preference, differences in learning styles, all those things, and you build that profile, and you design your lessons up front to hit that 7 out there, that person that has hearing impairment, or that person that might be an English language learner over here on the other side, or that person that might have some type of orthopedic impairment or a learning disability. And when we put that hook in and we design our lessons with differentiated activities, that are already upfront designed, and we provide different ways of students representing their learning. If we hit that set, we put that hook in there, we hit that set, we hit that 7 and 10, guess what? Guess what else we get when we put that hook in there? If we hit that 7 first, we get all those pins in the middle, okay? All those pins in the middle represent kids that are, I don't want to use the word average, that's a misnomer. But you know what I'm saying. I don't know if there's anybody that's average, really, but you know what I mean. The kids that are going to get it in spite of the teacher, they're going to learn to read on their own, they're going to learn, and it comes down to motivation. But universal design for learning was mentioned in this legislation first. And so we start seeing that emerge. And we realize that universal design for learning and differentiated activities are for all students. Especially design instruction, which we're going to talk about here in just a second, is for kids with IEPs, okay? So that's kind of how it fits together a little bit. And let's see what else we got here. IDEA is set up for students 3 to 21. Part C education is birth to 3. Part B is 3 to 21. Part A is the definitions, and Part D provides grants relative to education for students with disabilities. And so that's the way IDEA is set up. We have these 6 major principles of IDEA, okay? 0 reject. We have a child find. We have an ethical responsibility. If we know a student has a disability, we should be exploring giving them help, okay? 0 reject. We can't turn anyone away in IDEA. Everybody gets a free, appropriate public education if they have a disability, right? 0 reject. Non-discriminatory evaluation. The evaluations that we give to determine eligibility are written in such a way that they're not going to discriminate on any group, okay? There's no bias. There's no racial bias, no gender bias. You see what I'm saying? It's talking about equality. And then, of course, we've talked about FAPE at length here. That's a big piece, all right? Least restrictive environment. Candace mentioned that earlier. What is the definition of least restrictive environment? Anybody want to take a stab at it? What's the definition? Kyle, you remember from our training earlier? Pick on him. I'm going to pick on my buddy from Owsley County.
Least restrictive environments, that's whatever the environment is that the student is in that can learn at whatever levels being taught.
It's the best place for them, isn't it?
7th grade,
Yeah.
they're supposed to get it at the same level as everybody else.
Mm-hmm. So let's see if I get this. To the maximum extent appropriate, unique needs are met, meet them where they are, ambitious goals. To the maximum extent appropriate, we're going to put students with disabilities with their non-disabled peers to the maximum extent appropriate. I always add that on the end because that kind of crystallizes that idea. To the maximum extent that's appropriate for that student, taking into consideration their disability and their needs. And then we have those continual placement options that are decided in that conference summary. When we do a conference summary, we have to say, are they going to be in full-time regular ed first? We have to consider that, and we have to come up with reasons why we can't get it done there, okay? Because of the disability, because of the needs in special designed instruction, pacing, distractions, whatever it might be. But we come up with reasons on why that disability we have to go to that next continuum. And that would be regular ed with co-teaching, right? Regular ed's first, regular ed co-teaching. Then we get down here where we've got part-time special, part-time regular, right? Continual placement options. And then we come to a run for students that are self-contained all day. I think you think about your FMD population, okay? And then we have a run home hospital. We have special schools, and we have facilities, okay? We have home hospital, special schools, and facilities. So, the other principles here, there's parent rights that students with disabilities have. There's procedural safeguards that will keep them from being discriminated against, okay? They have rights to have due process of law provided to them. The notice has to come at a certain time. You send out a notice for a meeting, it has to be 7 days, right? 7 calendar days in most instances, right? We do have a 24-hour notice now that's part of the regulation for a violation of a student code of conduct. So the process of law, the procedural safeguards, and the due process of law are all kind of wrapped together. We have to give our parents a copy of that in its entirety one time a year at annual review. And anytime they ask for it, we have to give it. And anytime we are going to change their placement, we have to give it. And anytime we're going to do a discipline meeting and a manifestation determination based on their disability, we have to give them the procedural safeguards, sometimes known as parent rights in Kentucky, okay? And then the other part is parent participation. Huge concept, non-negotiable with idea. We have to include and go to our level best to get our parents involved and included in the decisions we make. When we hook our parents into helping us write the IEP, they're going to be more in tune with what they're doing. They're not going to disagree with very much of that, okay? So it's a safeguard for you as well. If you get in the habit of saying, hey, what do you think needs to be in here? Then we're good.